It will cost billions, it will take years, but with subway platforms packed to absolute capacity, the so-called downtown relief line took a step forward in the provincial capital this week. The public got a look at the proposed 8-stop route that joins the East End to downtown. Is it a good plan? Does it really provide the relief needed? Joining us now for their views, Karen Stintz, former chair of Toronto Transit Commission, now president and CEO of Variety Village, and Matti Siemiatycki, associate professor, geography and planning at the University of Toronto. Nice to see you both.
Hi.
So as a commuter, I'm keeping my fingers and toes crossed. But this has been a long time coming, hasn't it, Matti?
This has been decades in the making. The first map for this project actually dates back to 1910. There were ideas that we would build a relief line into the urban core, going back really over a century. Then in the 1980s, this plan took off again and there were proposals again to build a relief line to take pressure off of Yonge Street. Every time they've stalled or there's been other priorities. And I think now is a moment where we really need to get going. There's a lot of momentum, but there's still some real hurdles in place. There's community and how we're going to handle some of the community opposition, some of the impacts of this project, and then there's the money. How do we pay for this project? Billions and billions of dollars have to go to this project as well as many others, and we need to figure out priorities. That's the third hurdle. Is council going to make this project the priority, or are some of the other projects that are on the list going to move forward first?
I'm glad you brought all those topics up because we are going to get into them more. But let's talk about how this all came about. Karen, when you were chair at the TTC, did you have discussions about the downtown relief line?
We did, actually, and those discussions even predated my time as chair. I was first elected to council in 2003, and at that time there was discussions about the need for the downtown relief line. So there is no question that this has been a needed line, a discussed line, and all levels of government understand the importance of building this line.
And Matti, we have the map now. It's an eight-stop section of the line, and it will connect Pape Station and Osgoode stations. Have we cleared the most significant hurdles for this project?
In a short answer, no. There are many hurdles left to go. The route is always one part of it, and there's always debate about which is the most optimal and lowest cost and fastest route and where the station should be. But really, the money is the big issue. How are we going to pay for this big infrastructure project? And also the issue of prioritization. There are so many projects on a long list of priorities in this city and in this wider region. The City of Toronto, for example, alone has a $30 billion list of projects that have been approved but are unfunded. All of those are vying for money as well. This project seems to have found its way to the top of the list, but those other projects in an election year, all of those projects are going to be debated and they're going to have their advocates too. And so whether the money and the political will is behind this project now is really the key question.
So let's talk money. Do we know the commitments from the federal and provincial governments, what they will be?
This project took a big step forward this week when it received support from the provincial government with the city, an announcement that it would be part of a larger bundle of funding for a range of projects, including the Waterfront LRT and Smart Track. But these are promises that are made in the run-up to an election. And so
So do you think this is primarily because of the election?
I think elections are motivators, but they also this is the moment where we do express our democracy, and we're going to hear different proposals from the different parties, and depending on which party proceeds after the election, that will be when we see which projects really go forward first. But anytime there's promises made during an election, they should be taken with a grain of salt.
And Karen, were there funding ideas being discussed during your time on Toronto City Council that you'd like to see part of the discussion now?
Well, certainly when I was at council did actually take the step and approved a surcharge that would go into the property tax that would go directly towards building transit in the city. It was intended initially for the Scarborough subway, but that subway discussion continues to be ongoing. That being said, the money has been collected over the last several years. So there is opportunity for the city to create and enhance and increase this funding. And there's also other things that the city could look at in terms of how do they leverage infrastructure that they have to sell it and invest in other needed infrastructure.
And Matti, you've mentioned this a couple of times. There are other projects in the city that need to be built. What impact would that mean if this does go ahead for those projects?
Well, it's a matter of priorities and limited resources. There's only so much money, there's only so much capacity in the construction industry to build all of these projects at once. So if one project like the Downtown Relief Line goes first, it's going to mean that other projects are going to be delayed because of the money and because of the ability to plan and build all of these projects. So I think it will start to have a knock-on impact. And what you see in planning is that all of these projects are competing with each other. And we tend to do planning in this region one by one in terms of projects.
And is that how we should do it?
We need to think as a system, and we need to make a list of priorities of which ones are at the top of the list, which are going to deliver the most return on investment, and then proceed with those. But what tends to happen in this region is we plan each individual project. You hear advocates for the waterfront LRT, you hear advocates for the relief line, you hear a lot of talk about Scarborough and what should be done in that region. That's still a big project out there, $3.6 billion. So all of these projects are vying for attention, not to speak of all the wider region, which has significant transportation needs. So the key then is how do we pick the projects? And this project has seemed to find its way towards the top of the list, but we're not sure in an election year which one is really going to win out and go forward first.
The infrastructure projects that you just mentioned seem to be transit related. Are there any non-transit related infrastructure projects that maybe should be put on the back burner for now?
Well, there's a whole list of projects that are on the list. There's Rail Deck Park, which is an ambitious park project in the city core. And then there's affordable housing. There's billions of dollars of need for affordable housing. And part of the question is how are all of the governments going to come together and find their collective priorities in order to deliver these projects
municipal,
effectively.
provincial, and federal, right?
And federal. All of them need to come to the table for infrastructure. Any one of them is not going to be able to fund this alone. And because of that, how you find priorities and how the political interests overlap in order to deliver these projects effectively and select the projects that meet all of their interests, that is a big challenge.
And Karen, what impact do you think all of Toronto's unfunded infrastructure projects should have on the upcoming mayoral race in the fall?
Yeah, well, I think there's two issues. The provincial election and then the mayoral election, I think, will help identify what priorities are really and truly going to be built. Because right now there is a huge wish list, from the Rail Deck Park to the Gardiner to transit to Smart Track to Scarborough Subway to the Downtown Relief Line. And, you know, even if we had all the money, which we don't, we couldn't build all those things at the same time anyway. So there is some rationalization that will happen after the election. And my expectation is something like the Downtown Relief Line, it's not really a political issue. I think everyone agrees it needs to get built. And once the will is there, the funding will flow. And it is a project that I think will survive the election intact. And I think it's something that people can really expect to be built.
Do you think that should be the TTC's next top priority?
I actually think that, to what was said earlier, we need to move away from the one project funded priorities and look at it in terms of what does the system need. And Metrolinx the provincial government has, I think, moved us in that direction. And the reality is if the government or anyone wants to expand the subway into York Region and up into north of Steeles, it can't happen until we have a relief line. And so that piece, the Downtown Relief Line, is an integral piece of any subway expansion moving forward.
But I'm sensing maybe I'm projecting here, but I'm sensing some caution proceeding forward, because I'm sure a lot of people are relieved and excited about this.
For sure. But we've been around this boat before, right?
Right.
And there's a bit of a fatigue in the city, I think, around these projects and announcements. And because, again, then the politics comes into play, and then councillors argue with each other, should it be an LRT or a subway? And witnessing what's unfolded in Scarborough after the last 6 years, I think, has just left the public a bit skeptical that actually anything can get built. Even though we are building the largest transit project in the country as we speak, that seems to be overshadowed by what we can't seem to agree on. And because the Scarborough issue has been swirling now for more than 10 years, and even with the money, we still can't figure out what to build there. And I think that kind of indecision tends to cloud all the good work and all the good announcements and all the hope for what the future will bring.
Well, in the lead up to the public meetings and announcing the relief line, the Global Mail reported that a few years ago, City Councillor Paula Fletcher gave her support to residents at the southern end of Pape Avenue who wanted part of the subway route shifted away from their street. Those residents were concerned that the subway construction could damage their homes and said that nearby Carlo Avenue is wider and has more density, making it a better choice. Pape Avenue resident Jim Barr was one of the opponents, signing a petition at the time and saying he didn't want to lose his house. He argues now that the concern of homeowners was legitimate, but also feels that public opinion may be too easily whipped up. I think that people are too proactive now, too worried now, he said. Matti, what kind of impact will this project have for residents and businesses along the proposed route?
It will have a significant impact, and the impacts will be short-term during construction as well as long-term once the project opens. During construction, there will be disruption, and so I think that it's fair that residents are asking questions about what will be the impact on them. There are going to be some expropriations, and there's going to be major construction delays and issues on the streets as this project gets built. But the longer term is really where the benefit is. Increased mobility, greater access into the city core, the opportunity to revitalize some key properties, including the Unilever site, as well as some other key sites along the route. So there's some real opportunities, and residents will see the benefits. And everyone says they want transit in their neighborhood. They want to be better connected. They want to be able to get to work and see their friends and family faster. But you have to build these projects, and there are disruptions along the way. I think for city planners, the key is we do have to listen to our constituents. They have the local knowledge. They can tell us a lot about what's happening in their neighborhoods, and we have to balance that with the broader public interest and how we understand how we're going to proceed with these big projects that do cause impacts, that do have harms, but that also then do deliver significant benefits as well.
And Karen, in terms of other transit projects, how does this project compare in terms of how it would affect other people?
Well, as I said, for many reasons, not just the fact that Scarborough needs more transit, but also in convincing the public that we actually can make decisions around transit. The Scarborough issue needs to be resolved one way or another. And my hope is that out of this election, there can be some certainty about what will be built in Scarborough, because I have a new lens on it now that I work in Scarborough. It is a significantly underserved area of the city. So I think that decision needs to be made one way or the other. Then there's public confidence is restored that decisions around transit planning can be made. Then we move into the downtown relief line, which I would argue is really a pressing need, even made more so by the fact that the Eglinton LRT will be open and will be putting more pressure on the Yonge University subway line.
Now, this relief line will be downtown, but I've heard it argued that it would actually benefit people in the suburbs.
100%.
How important is it to focus on that idea?
Well, and I think this is the relief line that actually will serve the entire city. And it's called the Downtown Relief Line. I think it should be renamed because it really is going to help commuters more than anything. And again, those coming in from Scarborough, taking the Bloor-Danforth line, they can't get on at Yonge and Bloor. And they won't be able to get on at Yonge and Eglinton. And so having another way for them to get downtown, I think, is critical for the overall functioning of the system.
I'm a commuter. I shared this with you before we started. And I've been on the TTC where you have people almost hanging over the edge. While this is done, while we have more conversations, and this is going to take a couple of years, what can be done to address that problem until the new line opens, Matti?
So we have to unlock capacity on our existing system and make incremental changes that can improve capacity as we build out these larger projects that will take many years to build. So some of the strategies are adding new trains. The TTC is implementing an automatic train control system that will allow them to run trains closer together safely, and that will increase capacity somewhat. We also have to be utilizing our surface transit network more efficiently. So we've seen pilot projects to put in dedicated lanes on some of our downtown streets. I think we're going to have to
on King Street, right?
Like on King Street. I think we're going to have to start expanding some of those programs because you have so many people trying to get in and out of the city, and they're going to need to be able to get there quickly. That will take pressure off the Bloor-Danforth line and the Yonge line as we start to build out these much larger projects.
What about people who live in the west of the city? Are there going to be other relief lines for those parts of the city?
There will over time, but currently there's actually the UP Express out to Pearson Airport, which is really serving today as an express train out to the airport. But it does have a station at Dundas West, and that's an opportunity, again, if that could be better integrated into the public transit system and not just seen as a business commuter line. I think there's a real opportunity to see that as a relief line as well into the urban core as we build out these other infrastructure projects.
But people have to pay for each, and it gets expensive, right?
And this is the challenge in this region, is that we have infrastructure challenges, and then we have issues of the way that we pay for transit. And they've often been seen as separate systems between GO and the TTC subway and the suburban transit networks, and we have to see how we integrate those together. Metrolinx is working on a fair integration strategy, and that needs to get going, and we need to see how the UP Express can be worked into that network as well. I think that will help provide some of the relief on the TTC and on the subway.
Karen, you wanted to add something?
Well, just along that line, Presto was the first piece of the fair integration that needed to happen. So now that Presto is widely used along the GO and TTC and the other regional transit systems, it becomes more feasible to actually integrate those fares and talk about fare by distance, fare by time, and it's not actually the system that you travel, it's how long you're on it or how far you're going.
But there's been lots of problems with Presto, right?
Well, it's being integrated into the Toronto Transit Commission, and for sure our fare structure is bizarre anyway, so it makes it that much harder. But the gate, and there's been some issues with the gates. But that aside, it's still the right way to go if we're actually going to move to a system like London has, where you have one card that enables you to access multiple transit systems, and it actually puts the rider or the commuter in the center of the system. As opposed to each of the correct, as opposed to each of the transit agencies, and thinking that they have the monopoly over how people pay fares. So it's going to take some time, but my hope is we'll get there quicker than we have with the implementation of Presto. Once it's implemented, we'll have that mind shift around how we actually put the commuter in the center of the process.
I saw you write something down.
This is a new way of thinking about transportation planning and service delivery in this region. It's called mobility as a service, and it's the idea that we don't just see people as a transit rider or a cyclist or a pedestrian or a motorist. We see people as using all of these different modes for different parts of their daily travel needs. And so if we can integrate them better by using Presto, as Karen mentioned, but also using integrating the services so that they actually enable people to jump between the two of them to serve their personal needs, that's mobility as a service. And that's going to really expand how people get around and take some of the pressure off just thinking, how do we expand TTC to solve our congestion problems, to think about how do we improve mobility more broadly for people.
For people who live in the GTA, it is an important issue, but why should people outside of the GTA care about this? Karen?
Well, ultimately it affects all of us. If we're commuting from outside of the GTA into the downtown core, improving those commuter times, I would think would matter to people. And also as a region, our productivity increases as our transit options and our mobility improves. And so there is a benefit for everybody in the Greater Toronto Area and in the region as a whole.
We've talked at the beginning, we talked about how long this has been talked about. So now that we have an idea that we want to do this, how soon will this happen as far as getting shovels into the ground?
I think shovels realistically can hit the ground probably in the next 2 to 3 years if we really move everything ahead. And that's an optimistic.
That's frustrating as a commuter to hear that.
I was going to say that's actually quite optimistic. I would have said not before 10 years, but.
Really?
Yeah.
I think the plan so far is that the project will be open by 2031. I think the key is we have an environmental assessment going right now, and there are ways to speed up the planning of this project to get the project built. The key question is money and political will. Is there the money in place from all 3 levels of government that's going to be needed to build this project while keeping all of the other regional priorities and regional interest happy? And then where is the money going to come from to pay for this? And not just the money for capital, but also for operation and maintenance. You have to keep this thing up and running once it's built. So we need long-term revenue streams that are going to pay for this project, both while it's being built and then when it's up and running.
And Karen, anything to add? We've got 1 minute left.
No, I think it's exciting because finally transit is percolating up into the public consciousness that it's a necessary infrastructure component for a city that we want to build. And we talk about Toronto being a world-class city, that we need more subways, we need more LRTs, and the reality is we need more of everything. And we're at 2.7 million now. We're not going to stop. We have ambitious growth plans and 5 or 6 million around the region. We need to build a transit system that supports that.
Well, Karen and Matti, thank you so much for being here and helping us understand this issue a bit more. Thank you. Appreciate it.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.